True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. Thank you so much for being here. For all of those who tune in to almost all of our podcasts, I really appreciate you. And to those new to the show, we are a fact-based show. We basically discuss facts and we cuss and discuss those facts. I invite everyone to have a take. Certainly I have a take, and that doesn't mean everybody has to agree with me. I love looking at everybody's comments. And so not a lot of bells and whistles here. There's enough drama, quite frankly, in true crime and in the cases we discuss. So let's jump right into Luigi Mangione. I've been really looking forward to doing this podcast specifically because we're going to talk about the facts that are stacked up against Luigi Mangione at this point. We're going to talk about his manifesto, which I would call it more of some notes. And then we're also going to talk about the charges. What should he really be concerned about? What shouldn't he really be concerned about? So we're going to break all that down. First of all, everybody needs to know the facts in case you don't, just regarding what happened. So on December 4th, Brian Thompson, who was the CEO of United Healthcare, he was gunned down, basically assassinated. An assassin came from behind two cars where he had placed himself very strategically. He came out, and as Mr. Thompson was walking down the sidewalk from behind, the assassin squared up on his target, which was the back of Brian Thompson, and he shot multiple times. He hit Brian Thompson initially. First shot hits the calf area, the leg, the lower leg of Mr. Thompson, which causes him to sort of go down. Then he shoots two more shots. One misses completely, but the other shot is the kill shot that actually hits Brian Thompson in the back and causes his demise. He then, meaning the assassin, actually tracked Mr. Thompson, who was laying there against the building in the process of dying, and he attempts to shoot him more times, but he has multiple gun malfunctions. He also ejects multiple rounds, 3 rounds that have a very telling words on them that are written in Sharpie. Each one has one word, and they are the words deny, defend, and depose. And very early on, it's my belief that depose didn't mean that he would be deposed in a court of law or anything like that. It meant depose, which is where you dramatically take someone from a place of power. So that really quickly was what happened. And then there was a manhunt that lasted for several days where they searched for the assassin. Now, they ended up arresting Luigi Mangione, a 26-year-old from an extremely affluent family. When I say extremely affluent, I'm talking from the figures I've read, worth about $100 million. His family is from wealth that was really made by his grandfather, specifically in and I think this is very important, in the healthcare industry, running nursing homes, also had country clubs and various other estates and properties and things like that. But very wealthy family. He went to the finest of schools, which was an all-boys school where he grew up in Maryland, very prestigious. He graduated valedictorian. He went on to an Ivy League education at school where he received 2 degrees, a bachelor's degree as well as a master's degree, including in engineering/computer science. So this guy is no dummy, at least when it comes to his prowess in the classroom. We're not going to talk a lot about the ins and outs of United Healthcare. We're not going to talk about Brian Thompson. We're not going to talk about the huge firestorm really that's happened after the arrest and actually during the process of searching for him. You know, all the applause that have been received because Brian Thompson was really seen as just a horrible person. At a later podcast, I'll probably just focus on Brian Thompson. But today, I want to focus on what do the feds have against Luigi Mangione. And I want to focus on that because that's my bailiwick, is federal crimes. This is an FBI investigated crime. This crime spanned the United States really as a whole. There were interviews and information that had to be gleaned clear from San Francisco, information in Pennsylvania, obviously New York, Maryland, Hawaii, all over the span of the country. And I will say there will be much more investigation that's likely going on internationally because there is a huge span of time between July, when his mother reported him missing, and December 4th, and actually I should say November 24th, when he first comes in the picture in New York. He was there well in advance of the crime. A smart guy. He knew he needed to conduct site surveys. Remember, he says he felt it was very fortuitous that Brian Thompson was going to be there at this conference. I find the whole thing very interesting because I don't necessarily believe he initially had his sights set on Brian Thompson per se, or even United Healthcare. I think it was important for him to send a message that related to issues within healthcare. And again, I truly believe that part of that was because of his family making so much money in the healthcare industry, and really him sort of going against what his whole family stood for in terms of being entrepreneurs, in terms of being multi-millionaires, and sort of really I think turning his back on that even when he disappeared and bowed out of his family's relationships. But again, I want to stick with what is the evidence. So far, some of the most damning evidence, actually, I'm going to try to do it chronologically because there's a lot of evidence here. The video footage, and I know this has become so controversial, which I find interesting. There is video footage of Luigi Mangione in Starbucks. There's video footage of him at the hostel where he stayed. There's video footage at the murder scene, at the crime scene. There's video footage all throughout New York of him on a bike, various places in the city. So the video footage is going to be critical to this case. It's going to be the mainstay, if you will, of their timeline to show what happened to Luigi Mangione, the entirety of his time that he spent in New York leading up to the murder and then following the murder until his arrest. Now they have the ending point, which was in Pennsylvania, Altoona, Pennsylvania. So they're going to track him, his every movement. And I would believe that a huge part of that is going to be caught on videotape. We've only seen a small amount, but it's going to chronicle his entirety of movements from the minute he arrived in New York and possibly before then until his arrest. And it's critical that they do that, I think. And it's not going to be difficult because he used mass transit. He committed this crime in a city where video and was just at every street corner, on every block throughout the city. So I was asked a while back on News Nation if being in New York made it worse, like a needle in a haystack. This was before they had any idea where he was at. I said, well, actually, not necessarily. It's a two-edged sword, because whenever you commit a crime where there are millions and millions of people, there are thousands and thousands of cameras. And so they're going to be able to chronicle him. So I think the video footage is going to be pertinent. What's come up, which I find very interesting, is of course the different video still footage that was sent out on Crime Stoppers when the FBI and New York PD was looking for help from the public, and they sent out these still photos. And if you look at both of them, one photo, he has a very androgynous look, very feminine, right? He's kind of at an angle, and you can still see if you look at him now, he has a very chiseled jawline, and from a certain angle, from about here down, even though from here up, he's pretty masculine, other than these beautiful eyelashes that everyone who's a woman wishes we had. But he has these beautiful eyelashes, but he has this sort of androgynous look that is caught on camera when he pulls down his mask, either to flirt / show his face so that the person at the desk could identify that, yes, this identification matched up to the face that I see before me. But in any event, we have his face there. And then there's another photo of him sort of with his head down and this hood coming over. The reason you see such different looks, if you will, from him, it has to do with angles. It has to do with lighting. It has to do possibly even with filters that were used when they prepared these images to send out to the public, because they wanted to use the best filter that lit up his face the most. So that caused, I believe, the jacket and things like that to have distorted colors by a few hues. They look to be different colors, sort of like a green and a brown, but I believe it's likely going to be the same jacket, and you're just going to see different hues, although it's not beyond possibility that he did have multiple jackets. It's possible. But nevertheless, I believe that is why you see him looking pretty differently in some of these pictures. And Luigi Mangione definitely has one of those faces. And I just want to say personally, I identify with that. Everywhere I go, and this was well before I was in the media, which has only been the last couple of years, everyone thought they knew me. Oh, I've seen you here. Oh, I've seen you there. Oh, don't I know you? And some people have those sort of familiar faces. And then the other piece of that is the difference that angles and looks can have. And he looks so different depending on if he's shaved, if his unibrow is in full alert, or if he's been trimmed up, if he has that long scraggly hair, or if it's in that wonderful haircut we saw most recently. He looks a lot different depending on all those factors. And there's going to be no doubt when they present those that I believe it's going to be the same person, and it's not going to be just a still shot like what we got. They're going to have the actual video film, and it's going to be quite evident that is the same person. I know that's come up a lot. So video evidence. We also have the fingerprints that were apparently recovered from the water bottle that he had at Starbucks. We also, per New York PD, have DNA recovered from articles of the murderer, which I believe is probably going to be that same water bottle. Although I looked for a very specific answer to that, where are they saying, was it from the wrapper? Because if he had saliva and so forth, or touch DNA on the wrapper of the Kind bar, was that the DNA, or was it the actual bottle? But nevertheless, we know his DNA was found from items related to the murder that he used, prior to committing the murder. So those are huge. Let's just say you take the video, you take the fingerprints, you take the DNA. I think that is going to be very strong and very difficult to refute. What they probably will try to do, meaning his defense team, they will try to not necessarily refute that, but try to get it not accepted as evidence. They'll try to say the collection techniques were wrong. They'll try to say they didn't have a warrant to retrieve it. They'll try to say that it wasn't lawfully in the possession of law enforcement, or that the individuals conducting the tests have something in their background and they didn't do a good job testing it. They will work in every way they can to bring in giglio. Some people call it giglio. It's always been called giglio, where in the FBI and or Brady issues regarding the collection of that, because I think it's really irrefutable. Whenever you have strong evidence, you typically go after the investigation and the investigators because the facts are too strong. I think that's the situation we're going to have here. All right, so we have those, but then at his arrest, this is the evidence that is just almost insurmountable. He had his, and I don't use the word ghost gun. I think that was something the media made up. We call them Frankenstein guns. People in law enforcement and people in the gun industry, we call it that because it's essentially using different parts and pieces to put together a gun that is not traceable, which is where people get the ghost verbiage in, but it's not traceable. And you put it together, and the idea is that you have a gun that doesn't have a serial number, that can't be traced coming into this country or where it was manufactured from and then distributed and sold through ATF records and other records. So that's the idea behind it, no social security. But the problem is when you create a gun like that, you make it so very unique that it, in fact, is very unique to leaving marks, tool marks, on the casings, at the scene, and on the bullet that was surely extracted from Mr. Thompson and the bullet that missed. So what is all this to say? They found the gun that essentially matches the casings that were at the crime scene and specifically matched them to Luigi Mangione using tool marks. Tool marks from a fired gun are much more reliable than tool marks from a manual extraction, meaning the force to extract and eject that casing that held the bullet is very forceful when a gun is fired, as opposed to if you just rack the slide. And it leaves tool marks, which include extractor marks, ejection marks, and when there's firing, you get firing pin indentation that are unique to the different firing pins. And so all of that combined together are going to have a very clear picture as to where the gun came from, specifically when you have a gun that matches no other gun because you've made it from a 3D printout and using various parts and pieces. So all of that is just to say this is extremely strong information, unlike, in my opinion, what was found in the Delphi case. This is strong because, again, it was fired and it was from a gun that was extremely unique. In other words, it wasn't a SIG P226 that's, manufactured, thousands, tens of thousands of them, something like that, or a Glock. In his possession beyond the Frankenstein gun was also a Glock magazine. It had 9 rounds in it, and I'm sure they will look to see if that ammunition matched the ammunition that was actually used in and during the crime. In addition, they found his clothing that matched the clothing that is seen in the video. To me, that's another big indication that it was him. In addition, they found the face mask, and that face mask we could again see on the video. You can see how this all intertwines to show that was the face mask indeed worn by the murderer. And now they have Luigi Mangione, and he has the matching face mask. Again, you shouldn't look at one of these variables, but all of them put together: fingerprints, DNA, mask, clothing, ballistics. All of that makes for a very strong picture. In addition, he had 4 fake IDs on him, and one of them was the ID he used at the hostel. Yikes. Again, they're not going to be able to go after this evidence other than to find fault with how it was collected, in my opinion, and was it legally obtained, and trying to find fault with these investigators. They're going to pick them apart and have they ever been in trouble? Did they ever do anything else wrong? Have they said anything since the arrest, before the arrest? Are they racially biased? Blah, blah, blah. Again, they are going to attack the investigation and investigators because this evidence is just overwhelming. Finally, let me make sure. Oh, the suppressor. Yes, they had a suppressor also that was recovered from him in the backpack. Again, same, or not the same backpack. There was a backpack that was disposed of in Central Park that had the Monopoly money. But there was a backpack that was found when he was arrested. And I've always said, did he have a backpack in the backpack? That always made a lot of sense to me. That way you could have the backpack with the Monopoly money. And when you go through Central Park, you shed that and you keep going. Plus, that would be the exterior backpack that would be most telling from the video images and surveillance. All right. Now, I want to get to, let me make sure. Let's see. I think I've got everything there. Yeah. Okay. I want to get into the notebook entry, the notebook that was found in his possession when he was arrested, and the particular notebook entry. And I'm calling it a notebook entry. Listen, how the media can call this a manifesto is just, it's like calling a recipe a cookbook. It's absolutely doesn't make any sense. A manifesto, it was what was written by Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Yes, I'm using him because of the nexus that was apparent with Luigi Mangione and Ted Kaczynski in terms of Luigi Mangione reading his writings, reading not only what he wrote, but apparently having some high regard for him, at least in terms of taking action and possibly following those same types of footsteps. So Ted Kaczynski's manifesto was 35,000 words, pages and pages and pages of his explanation about what he stood for, why he did what he did, what he is all about, his reasoning. It's his manifesto. It's what he stood for. Luigi Mangione's was 200 words, a little over 200 words, okay? This was, in my opinion, him just writing notes, I think, not unlike what I do. I have notebook after notebook after notebook of pages in my scribble and my jargon regarding podcasts and regarding shows I'm getting ready for and regarding just my thoughts on different cases. And that's how I perceive this. I want to quickly go over it, and this will be way shorter than the one we did yesterday. Quote, to the feds, I'll keep this short because I do respect what you do for our country. I thought that was very interesting. He sort of gives this respectful comment to the FBI, essentially, who he knows, if he's caught, that they're going to be involved in this. I mean, he lived and traveled all over this country and moved all over this country, and everything went past state lines. So to me, he's saying, listen, I know this is a federal offense, and I know you're going to be investigating it, FBI. And he says, listen, I have a lot of respect for you. And he says, to save you this lengthy investigation, I state plainly, I wasn't working for anyone. Now, I think part of the reason he says that is because he wants to make sure he gets full on credit. He doesn't want anyone else to have any credit in this because this is very important to him. And it's part of, I think, who he was in terms of his ego. And it was very important for no one else to get credit for what he deemed as something that was important and righteous in a warped way. That's what I think. I state this plainly that I wasn't working with anyone. So, not only was this all him, he wasn't working with or beside or, anyone. He also says this was fairly trivial. And this is a smart guy. This is a guy who, uh, reading something and comprehending it and putting it to practice or use, I don't think was any issue for him. And I state that based on his academic achievements, being accepted into Penn, as well as the degrees he received. So he says some elementary social engineering. Social engineering? What I think he means by that is really being able to figure out where Brian Thompson would be, when he would be there, what hotel he was staying at, communicating with others, what he had to do to figure out some of these pieces, and then also to make his decision on who he was going to target. He next says some basic CAD, which is just computer aided design, which he needed to make, the silencer and the firearm, his Frankenstein gun. So that's what I think he's talking about when he says CAD, and a lot of patience. He needed so much patience. Listen, he arrived in advance of this crime, 10 days in advance. Brian Thompson arrived on Monday. So he had to wait everything out. He had to be very patient. It gave him, though, a lot of time to make sure that this crime really went down without a hitch. His biggest issue, in my opinion, was he was a deplorable marksman, which makes a lot of sense. If you don't spend a lot of time at the shooting range, even to shoot somebody up close, it doesn't always go that well. So that was his biggest concern. I don't know that he knew that should be his biggest concern, but it should have been, because when you are under stress, even though he's quite calm, we can all see it in the pictures, he handled his weapon very well, but his marksmanship there was a lot to be desired. And part of it could have been because his Frankenstein gun, probably wasn't to specs in terms of the sight alignment of the front and the rear sight, and the trigger mechanism might have been very glitchy, that would have helped result in terrible marksmanship from what we saw. But it was good enough to get the job done, sadly. The spiral notebook, if present, so he talks about his own notebook, has straggling notes and to-do lists that illuminate the gist of it. I mean, he doesn't say this is my manifesto. He doesn't say this is my end all. I mean, these notes are elementary, rudimentary, and he explains that. The spiral notebook, if present, has some straggling notes and to-do lists that illuminate the gist of it. My tech is pretty locked down because I work in engineering, so probably not much info there. So he locks it down. He's telling law enforcement that. I will submit to you, though, that people in that business are probably going to be able to unlock it down, but we'll see. I mean, maybe he was good enough to make it impenetrable in terms of the digital forensics that are going to be analyzed on that by the best of the best in the FBI. We'll see. He says, I do apologize for any strife or traumas, but it had to be done. So it's such a oxymoron to sort of apologize, but that's no apology. If I know I'm going to do something illegal or say something bad or do something bad and I apologize in advance, it's ludicrous. It's not a real apology when you know you're going to do it anyway and you say you apologize. That's just for you. That's just for you. So, or hoping others won't look as badly on you. But I don't take this apology. I think it's absurd that he says these words. He says, frankly, these parasites simply had it coming. So first he apologizes, and then he says the parasites have it coming. I think that's how he really felt, right? That parasites had it coming. He doesn't have any regard for people, and really I will say he's talking about his own family, because he's talking about anyone. I think how I take it is not just in healthcare, but generally speaking, and there's other information that is out there regarding his thoughts on this, really in his own writings on Reddit, that outline really how he feels about people in a position of power and wealth, yet that's what he comes from. And you know what? He might seemingly have a problem with them, but he doesn't have a problem using the money, because he traveled all over the world after his surgery using the money when he was on his hiatus from his family, when his family reported him missing. And he also is using the money from, that would have been made to hire some of the highest priced attorneys in the country. So, as I've always said, he is a complete hypocrite when it comes to that piece. He says, a reminder, the U.S. has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world. That I agree with. Yet we rank roughly number 42 in life expectancy. And I think it's this premise, along with many others in this general realm, that have so many people upset, this point he's making, because it's pathetic. It is really pathetic, the amount of money charged for healthcare, and really that the healthcare industry, from providers and the healthcare system itself. And I think providers are horrible. As many of you know, my son was brought to the ER with a concussion. I rode with him in the ambulance. We literally rode the ambulance, got out of the ambulance, went straight into the emergency, the actual room, where one doctor, I believe there were 2 nurses and a couple other people, assessed him, made sure he had a level of consciousness, that he could feel his fingers and toes, and they were all gone within minutes. I don't even know if it was 5 minutes. And our bill was $29,000. I would not allow any x-rays other than his CT scan, just from my medical background. I mean, they were trying to do a urinalysis on him. And like he was in a football game. Here's the film, which I showed the doctor. Here's what happened, so they could see the mechanism of injury. And again, I'm a nationally registered EMT and a tactical medic for the SWAT team for years. They don't need a urinalysis to see that there's a possible cervical spine and or head trauma situation. They took his blood, which, that happens so quickly. Right when we get in, they take his blood. That was thousands and thousands of dollars. They gave him 2 Tylenol, which they charged us a lot for, and they gave us a Gatorade, which they charged a lot for. He was there for approximately 3 hours. Of course, they wanted to keep him overnight. Only saw the doctor one other time, and that was to say, we want to admit him. And I said, no, not going to admit him. I want him to come home. I'll observe him there. If there's any issues, we'll be back. But we had already been sitting around there for 3 hours with absolutely nothing happening except being cold and, nothing happening, because at that point he had regained consciousness. He had regained all his feeling. And so he needed to be down and still and monitored. And there was absolutely negative findings on the CT. So that was very important. So when we got back home, I got him an MRI and took him to a neurologist the next day, that Monday. But the point is, we were charged $29,000, and United Healthcare is who we have. I don't want to digress too much on this, but what I do want to say is, and I literally am so upset about this. I'm going to the providers. I've asked for a very specific indication. You know what they said? They said it was basically for triage. that that's what this was for, and use of equipment. The only thing they used on him was a pulse oximeter on his finger. That was it, to monitor his vitals. The CT was a different charge. The doctor was a different charge. That's what the hospital charged. So this whole medical situation we're in is obscene, and it's terrible. I want to contrast that really quickly, and I'm so sorry to digress, but I want to contrast that really quickly. When I was playing elephant polo in Thailand, I got hit in the eye with somebody that, took their mallet around. I was down mucking for the ball, and it hit me. I still have about probably, whatever, a half an inch scar right here. And in any event, I was taken, obviously I was bleeding profusely. It didn't even hurt. I was good to play. But they insisted I go to the hospital. I went by ambulance. I went straight to the emergency room. There was a doctor there. Then they got a ophthalmologist to see me and do an eye exam to make sure my cornea wasn't messed up. The doctor gave me whatever it was, 8 stitches or so, stitched me all up. They gave me the antibiotic because obviously they were concerned about that. And my whole bill that I paid that day on the spot was $100 US. $100 US. My daughter was recently in Thailand. Also, we have bad things happen in Thailand, I guess, although it's wonderful there. And she had typhoid fever. She was in the hospital for several days and incurred multiple treatments to try to, treat her for typhoid. So she not only had to do the initial treatments that didn't work, then she had to do another set of treatments. I think we paid a total of $1,500 for all her treatments, for the doctor, for the stay at the hospital all those days. Our U.S. system of healthcare is completely broken. I'm not a healthcare expert, but I'm just talking from personal experience. I think many of you, from what I've seen, have the same notions and have experienced a lot of the same issues. And so I'm glad these issues have been brought to light, but that doesn't give you anyone the right to cowardice,ly go behind somebody and shoot them in the back to make this point. Somebody like Luigi Mangione, unlike most of us, Luigi Mangione had the pedigree, the connections, the education, and the background to actually become part of a company, become a CEO, and change what we all see, at least with one company, right? So anyway, I've totally digressed. Let me go back to the facts of his note. There's not much left, because again, it's very short. He says, United is the unintelligible largest country in the US by market cap, behind only Apple, Google, Walmart. It has grown and grown, but has our life expectancy. No, the reality is these, again, they couldn't make it out, have simply gotten too powerful, and they continue to abuse our country for immense profit because the American public has allowed them to get away with it. Obviously, the problem is more complex, but I do not have the space, and frankly, I do not pretend to be the most qualified person to lay out the full argument. At least he understands that this is complex. This isn't something Luigi Mangione figured out. It's something that, this is a complex problem, which I hope, because we do have a new administration now, so there's a chance to sort of, hopefully, since he seems to be wanting to wipe the slate with everything else, hopefully Trump is going to wipe the slate when it comes to healthcare, perhaps, and maybe somebody can find some answers, because it needs to happen. He further says, obviously the problem is more complex. Sorry, I repeated that. But many have illuminated the corruption and greed, and he specifically denotes Rosenthal and Moore, who's Dr. Elizabeth Rosenthal and Dr. Susan Moore. Dr. Susan Moore, essentially, she talks a lot about, I think her main platform is the racism that exists within the healthcare system, based on economics and a lot of other factors. And then Dr. Elizabeth Rosenthal, really, she's from Harvard, and she talks about how broken our system is. So I found it interesting because it shows me he did some research and some background. decades ago. He says they did work decades ago, and the problem simply remains. I think that also leads us to why he really felt, or at least he's saying, that he felt he needed to take action, because for decades it's been looked at and nothing has been done. He talks about it all being about a country for immense profit because the American public has allowed them to get away with it, meaning healthcare system. So much profit in it, and the U.S. citizenry has allowed them to get away. Obviously, the problem is more complex. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Let me get to the very end. I kind of regurgitated that again. Sorry. He says, but it is not an issue of awareness at this point, but clearly power games at play. Evidently, I am the first to face it with such brutal honesty. So he really, elevates himself. I'm the first to face it with such brutal honesty. I would say he should have said, I'm willing to face it, or will be the first to face this with such brutality. Because I think all of us, many of us, millions of Americans, if we're honestly talking, we understand our healthcare system is broken. And so he wasn't brutally honest. He was brutally murderous, if again he's convicted. Right now, he's only been charged. Finally, I want to go over his charges. So I find the whole thing very interesting. So he's been charged, first of all, in Pennsylvania. That has to do with the identifications and the gun that he possessed, all of that being illegal. No big deal there. The New York charges have been now elevated beyond second-degree murder, which I explained in a previous podcast, that typically in New York, it's different from almost any other state, that in New York, it's not what happens, it's who it happens to. Are you a doctor? Are you a law enforcement officer? Are you a judge? Were you hired by somebody to do the crime? It's very unique to get to first-degree murder, whereas everywhere else, you just have to plot the murder. It has to be intentionally done, plotted in advance, right? You have to have a forethought. But it's not that way in New York. There are a lot more factors. And one of the factors, and this is how they got into the first degree murder, because nothing else applied in that statute. Again, he wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a cop, he wasn't a corrections officer. And so how they got to this, and he wasn't hired by somebody, was by saying it was a terroristic act. Now, this is what I think they're going to have trouble proving. You have to prove that the act was meant to intimidate or coerce a civilian population. That's directly from that statute. I think he's overcharged in New York. I've said that from the get-go. I said he should have been charged with second-degree murder. I think charging him with terrorism takes the facts that we have. Again, we don't have this massive manifesto. It takes the facts that we have, and it makes it difficult, I think. I don't know if they're going to be able to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. But I'm not even going to talk anymore about New York charges, because in my opinion, they don't matter either. They're almost as superfluous as the Pennsylvania charges. In other words, one on top of another, on top of another. The only charges that really matter are the federal charges. There's 4 of them, and I'll tell you why. Number 1, murdering somebody with a firearm. Number 2, interstate stalking resulting in death or murder, in other words. 3, discharging a firearm with a silencer. And 4, stalking using interstate facilities. 2 of those, the first 2 I named, are punishable by the death penalty. Will they seek it? I don't know. I mean, we just had 38 different people's sentences that have been sitting on death row commuted by Biden. But now we have Trump. And Trump said right when he gets in, we're not going to let these 41 people on death row, we're going to get down and dirty, and they're going to be put to death as quickly as possible. So it was clear that that was his agenda, and it was clear that it was Biden's agenda to make sure that didn't happen. and it's not going to happen. But what's going to happen with him? I think it'll be very interesting. I don't know if his case will be adjudicated within 4 years, but it'll be interesting to see if the death penalty is put on the table. I think it might be, because this is just the facts. The facts really are strong, and I think the country does not want it to be okay for somebody to be able to walk down the street in a city and assassinate somebody in the back, like what happened. No matter what you think about healthcare, I think that this might be an exclamation point that the federal government puts on this. So they say that the processes are going to run quote unquote parallel, meaning it'll all unfold parallel. Supposedly, though, in court, the New York prosecutor said he's going to prosecute first. We'll see if that really ends up happening. But again, the federal charges, that's where it's at. Those are the charges that are punishable by death and certainly life in prison. The terrorism charge is punishable by life in prison. But I think they've got a long road to hoe to convince all their jurors that indeed they meet the threshold of true terrorism. Listen, we all saw terrorism on the 1st of this year, and that was terrorism for a specific religious purpose and to invoke terror in our citizenry. Did Luigi Mangione, is that really his purpose? I know it also says to change policy or words to that degree, but it's stronger than that. Sorry, I should read verbatim what it says. Intimidate or coerce a civilian population. I don't know how they're going to get to that with Luigi Mangione, but they have a great federal case. This federal case should be pretty much a slam dunk. Everyone, thanks for joining. And until next time, may justice be served.